Nixon Shock 1971, the secret weekend that ended the gold standard. Part 1. Sunday, August 15, 1971. 9 o'clock in the evening, Eastern Time. Across America, television sets are playing a rerun of Bonanza. Cowboys, gunfights, the familiar comfort of a Sunday night. Then, without warning, the picture cuts away. A network announcer breaks in. The President of the United States is about to address the nation. Richard Nixon looks straight into the camera. For the next 18 minutes, he will speak calmly, almost reassuringly, about jobs, about prices, about what he calls a new prosperity. Most people watching at home have no idea what is actually happening. But at Treasury departments and central banks scattered across dozens of time zones, phones are already ringing. Because in those 18 minutes, Nixon is about to tear up a promise the United States had kept for 27 straight years, that any dollar held by any government on Earth could be exchanged for real, physical gold. By the time he finishes speaking, the financial architecture that had run the entire post-war world will be broken beyond repair. This is part 1 of the story of the Nixon Shock, how a system built to last forever collapsed in a single weekend, inside a wooden lodge in the mountains of Maryland. To understand why one Sunday night broadcast could shake the whole planet, we need to understand how much of the modern world quietly rested on that one promise. Every airline ticket priced across borders, every barrel of oil sold internationally, every loan one government extended to another, all of it revolved around the fixed value of the dollar. Pull that anchor out, and everything tied to it starts to drift. The promise of 1944. Rewind 27 years to a resort hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire, summer of 1944. Representatives of 44 Allied nations, still fighting a world war, gathered to design the financial system that would follow it. Their agreement, signed at Bretton Woods, rested on one idea. The United States would fix the dollar at $35 per ounce of gold and redeem it on demand for any foreign government that asked. Every other major currency, in turn, was pegged to the dollar. The dollar became the anchor of the world. Gold became the anchor of the dollar. In 1945, the U.S. held more than 70% of all the monetary gold on Earth. Nobody seriously doubted Washington could keep its word. But built into that same success was a flaw that would take nearly 30 years to surface. The flaw nobody wanted to see. In 1960, Belgian-American economist Robert Triffin explained it to Congress in plain terms. For the rest of the world to have enough dollars to trade and hold in reserve, America had to keep sending dollars abroad, running persistent deficits, spending more overseas than it earned. But the more dollars piled up in foreign vaults, the less those dollars were actually backed by the gold in Fort Knox. Sooner or later, foreign dollar holdings would outgrow the gold available to redeem them, and the promise would rest on trust alone. Economists later called this the Triffin dilemma. By 1961, the tipping point had already arrived. Dollar claims foreign governments could legally exchange for gold exceeded the actual U.S. gold reserve. Washington's first fix was cooperation. In 1961, the U.S. and 7 European central banks formed the London Gold Pool, jointly buying and selling gold to hold the price at $35, no matter what speculators tried. It worked for a while, but the pool was selling real metal to defend an increasingly unreal price, while America kept running the very deficits flooding the world with dollars in the first place. In March 1968, following a sterling devaluation and a fresh run on gold, France, under President Charles de Gaulle, long suspicious of what French officials called America's exorbitant privilege, pulled out entirely. The pool collapsed days later, replaced by a patchwork 2-tier system. One official gold price for central banks, one floating market price for everyone else. It bought time. It solved nothing. The final countdown of 1971. By 1971, that patchwork was unraveling in real time. That May, West Germany, tired of importing American inflation through its fixed exchange rate, let the Deutsche Mark float freely. The dollar promptly fell more than 7% against it. Switzerland withdrew from the Bretton Woods arrangement that August. Around the same time, French President Georges Pompidou sent a French naval vessel across the Atlantic specifically to bring French gold reserves home from New York. On August 5th, a report from the U.S. Congress itself recommended devaluing the dollar, an extraordinary admission that the $35 promise might not survive. Then, on August 11th, Britain's ambassador walked into the U.S. Treasury and asked for something almost nobody expected an ally to actually ask for. $3 billion in gold moved out of American vaults and set aside for Britain, just in case. It wasn't a threat. Britain was simply doing what the rules allowed. But inside the Treasury, the request landed like a verdict. Paul Volcker, the undersecretary who would later run the Federal Reserve itself, recalled the moment for what it was. If Britain, the country that had helped design this entire system, was ready to cash in its dollars for gold, then the system itself was finished. By then, America's gold reserves had fallen to barely $10 billion, against roughly $40 billion in foreign-held claims that could, in theory, all show up asking for gold at once. The United States no longer had enough gold to keep its word if its creditors ever called it in together. The summons to Camp David. Nixon didn't wait for the crisis to widen further. On Friday, August 13th, he summoned roughly 15 top economic officials to Camp David for a weekend of secret deliberation. The guest list was deliberately narrow. Treasury Secretary John Connally, Fed Chairman Arthur Burns, Undersecretary Paul Volcker, Budget Director George Shultz, and a handful of aides. Notably absent, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. Whatever this weekend was about, Nixon had decided it belonged to the economists, not the diplomats. Inside the Aspen Lodge, John Connally, a blunt-spoken Texan, argued for the boldest possible move, shut the gold window completely, and let the shock force America's trading partners to adjust their currencies. Arthur Burns pushed back, worried about how allies who had built their reserves around the dollar's promise would react to Washington simply walking away from it. Paul Volcker shared some of that unease, but he had watched the British request land on his own desk days earlier and understood the old system was already dying on its own schedule. The only real choice left was whether America would control the moment it ended or be overrun by it. Connally's argument won. The group settled on a three-part plan: suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold, freeze wages and prices nationwide, and impose a 10% surcharge on imports. A plan that would touch nearly every household in America and every central bank on the planet, and almost none of them would get any warning before it happened. The weight of waiting. By Saturday, the plan was set, but Nixon held it back. He wanted maximum impact and maximum control over how the news landed, delivered directly by him to as many Americans as possible at once. He chose primetime television on a Sunday evening, so European and Asian markets would already be closed when the news broke, giving foreign governments no chance to react before it went public. For 2 more days, the plan sat finished but unspoken, known to barely more than a dozen people in the entire U.S. government. Allies who had spent nearly 3 decades building their economies around the dollar's promise had no idea what was coming. On Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, American television networks interrupted their regular programming. Millions of families sat down expecting an ordinary end to an ordinary weekend. What they were about to hear instead would end the gold-backed dollar forever, reshape the global economy overnight, and leave every currency on Earth floating free of the metal that had anchored money for centuries. That broadcast, what Nixon actually said, how the world reacted within hours, and what it built in the decades since, is the story of part 2. Follow the channel so you don't miss it.